Today we are talking about something that has been making the rounds recently, and that is card prices. We're gonna chime in on the currently ongoing discussion of, is Yu-Gi-Oh too expensive? And it feels like it's something that pops up every other month or anything like that, because we have talked about it in the past, but I wanted to just collect all the points that I've made or all the things that I'm thinking about it and have a discourse about it in one place. The cause for the current, I even want to call it an outrage, because every once in a while it seems to be worse than other times, is obviously the fact that the Wanted package is incredibly expensive at the moment. I feel like the Wanted engine being expensive is something that's been going on for a while, but I think the card that really has brought everyone over the edge of complaining is the Bonfire, right? People are always complaining Yu-Gi-Oh is expensive. I think the point where it got into an actual discourse that was to be had again was when Bonfire appears to be at this point, and I'm using European prices, a 65 euro pre-sale kind of card is the current situation, right? And we're going to talk about other things as well. You don't have to name all the examples of currently expensive cards. We're going to talk about Thrust, we're going to talk about SP, all that kind of stuff today. But I feel like the Wanted engine and Bonfire are what really sparked this discussion at the moment. Before I bring forward some of my points towards this, I want to tackle some of the more common points that are being made at the moment and give you guys my opinion on it, and also discuss these things with you guys, right? One of the more common points that's being made is that people are comparing it to other times, right? People are like, oh, you think it's bad right now? Remember Teledad? Remember when Crush Card was a price card that cost you $1,000 or anything like that, right? You technically are right. Maybe there were periods in Yu-Gi-Oh where it was worse. Maybe there were times where it was better as well. But in general, I think this sort of stuff is not a very good argument. I don't think it's a very valid argument either. Only because it used to be worse doesn't mean that it's good right now, if you get what I'm saying. Like, if it's an actual problem existing for people today, it doesn't freaking matter that you had it worse when you started playing Yu-Gi-Oh in 2008. Yes, the game has always been expensive, but I do not think that that makes it okay, right? Another argument that I very commonly hear is that, like, Yu-Gi-Oh has always been expensive. It's a luxury, right? Being able to play Yu-Gi-Oh is a luxury. Whatever, hobbies are expensive, that kind of thing, right? To which I say, you're not wrong, but still, my personal take on this is that even though we have kind of learned to deal with it, we've kind of come to terms with the fact that it is a luxurious hobby to have, it is an expensive hobby to have, it doesn't necessarily justify it, or it doesn't mean that that is the optimal way how it should be. Because honestly, I want to start this discussion by just making my first point, which is that whenever a card is expensive, that shit sucks. I think it sucks when Yu-Gi-Oh is expensive, because my very simple take is that the more people are able to enjoy this game, the better, period. That is my opinion. I love this game and I want everyone to be able to enjoy it, and the fact that decks being expensive stops people from actually playing the game, it sucks. I don't take any pride whatsoever in being able to afford expensive cards or having a luxurious hobby or anything like that. I don't want it to be that way. Even though you are right, it is that way. Some people are proud of being able to afford expensive stuff. I'm not like that. I hate it when this stuff is expensive. I want as many people as possible to be able to enjoy the hobby. There's nothing wrong with being proud of, I don't know, owning expensive cards or taking pride in having a very rare card, whatever, that's okay. But I don't think that it should price out other people from playing the game. And we are going to talk about potential solutions for this sort of problem, because another point that is very commonly being made that I want to speak up against a little bit, always critiquing, oh, Konami just want to make money or something like that. And we've talked about this in the past, but I personally think that that is something that is very natural for a card game, is that the freaking company wants to make money. Yes, we don't have to hide that fact. And I am not mad at Konami for trying to make money, because let's be honest, I hope that Yu-Gi-Oh makes them plenty of money for a lot of years to come. That is the one thing I also want to set straight. While I do want the game to be as affordable for as many people as possible, I also want Konami to be eating good, basically, right? We can't just make the point of, oh my god, company bad for trying to make money. I think the problem here is that we are a little bit out of balance between what Konami thinks makes them the most money and what people feel like is reasonable, right? What I do want to talk about is, are there maybe other ways for Konami to still make money, but maybe be still more consumer friendly, and in return maybe even attract more people to the game? Because even if you make a little bit less money off of an individual, if there's more people out there that play the game in response to that, then maybe you're making more money or the same amount of money, with everyone being a little bit more happy, right? Like, if you attract more players to the game, you have to make less money off of each individual player that plays the game in order to sustain, you know, that kind of stuff, right? That's the direction I want to drive the discussion towards. If there is one thing you cannot argue with as much as you maybe would like to, is that the way the current system is, which we're going to critique the current system in a bit, but the way the current system is, it has been working for them for a long time. This is not something they've recently started doing, you know. Making the chase cards high rarity is a system that they've been applying for 20 years or something like that, and it's been a very good business for them. Otherwise it wouldn't have been able to, you know, exist for the past 25 years, and it's been working for them. And that's the problem, essentially, is that it has been working so well, right? Which on the one hand is good for the game, right? But at the same time, obviously a lot of people would like the system to change, but it is hard for a company to change a running system, right? But okay, let's look at the current situation a little bit more. One thing we're also going to bring into this, to have a little spin on the discussion from a current competitive perspective, is how bad is it going to be moving into the next format? Are you going to be forced to pay that money for the wanted engine or anything like that if you're trying to compete? Right? Is that something you will have to do, or is there maybe a way around it that is not going to be as expensive? Obviously, biggest culprits right now, wanted engine. I only opened up the wanted engine, but freaking wanted is $80 right now, and I think it used to even be higher. Yeah, it's like 2 weeks ago the card was even higher than that. I don't know what exactly made it go down. I'm not here to talk about the exact price developments of this card. That is not my job of predicting what a card is going to be in a couple of days or anything like that, which, by the way, that's another common point that people make, and this is one of the most outrageous arguments in my opinion. People were like, oh, if you bought this card at release, you would have paid way less. Another argument that I very commonly hear, or I read it somewhere the last, I don't know exactly who said it, but it was on Twitter. Someone said, like, a couple weeks ago, I bought this many of that card because I knew it was going to go up, and then I sold all of them now, and now I can afford the whole wanted engine basically for that, because I was smart a couple weeks ago and bought another card. Those two arguments, I am very much baffled how anyone thinks that's an actual argument. First things first, only because wanted was cheaper at release does not mean it was ever affordable. Like, that card was still 45 bucks, which you still needed the playset, so that's still 120 bucks for 3 cards, which is still a lot of money for some people. So only because the problem was not as bad a couple weeks ago does not mean it was not a problem then, right? The card was always expensive. The other thing is, you should not be a freaking investor to be able to afford this game as someone who's on a lower budget. This is not the freaking stock market, okay? You should not be forced to make freaking insane predictions and buy the cards at the right times and offload them at the right times in order to afford a freaking wanted engine. Yes, you can make some money off of these, but you can also lose a lot of money, and you should not be incentivized to make these kind of educated guesses as to which card is going to go up, which card is going to go down. These are things you should not be forced to do in a freaking card game, okay? Simple as that. One thing I've also said in the past, if anything has to be expensive, which apparently that's currently the world we're living in. Okay, let's talk about it from that perspective. We are in a world where Yu-Gi-Oh cards are expensive. Okay, period. That's the world we live in right now. If anything is expensive, my take is that it's better if it's an archetype or like only a specific deck, because then in theory you will have the option to play something else, right? That's the one positive, and I am the kind of guy to try to find the positives in situations. That was the positive when it came to, for example, Vanquish Soul being super expensive, or Centurion being expensive, because those were like the only cards were even worth picking up in those side sets, right? And we're gonna talk about those side sets in a little bit. Give me a minute. Those carried the entire side sets on their shoulders pretty much, and they were expensive because of that. But at the very least, you weren't forced to play Centurion or Vanquish Soul, right? If those were not required to compete in Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Like if you didn't want to spend the money for Vanquish Soul, you just didn't get Vanquish Soul. The same was true for Centurion. Those decks, they could compete, but they weren't needed to compete. And that kind of quote-unquote design is better, in my opinion, than if they make staples super expensive. And you know what I'm gonna gravitate towards in a second in this discussion, because obviously that is not what they do all the time, right? However, the Wanted engine is also a little bit different, because the Wanted engine, or the Wanted Snake Eye stuff, Bonfire, and so on and so forth, those cards are not exactly comparable to something like Centurion or Vanquish Soul, because Centurion and Vanquish Soul were bad, and I didn't like that people that maybe liked those decks were not able to afford them, but at the very least you weren't forced into playing them. However, you could make the argument that freaking Fire King Snake Eye, from a competitive perspective, it is very, very close to being mandatory. I have the most recent OCG metagame up here, and the fire decks, Fire King, Snake Eye, and Rescue Ace, they make up about 50% of the metagame. I don't know where the line is for something to be mandatory to be able to compete, because you could say, yeah, you can compete with Voiceless Voice, you can compete with Branded, you can compete with Fluanderies, you can compete with Labyrinth, apparently, right? And I mean, this is just the OCG. It's not a complete perfect prediction for what's going to happen in the TCG, but I think it's likely that it's going to look somewhat similar when it comes to the Fire King Snake Eye percentages, right? The fire decks are going to be incredibly dominant. There are other options, but the question is, at which point are you happy with the other options? Is it, if it's a 10% representation, does it have to be better than that? For like 20%? Does it have to be 30? Does it have to be whatever? You know, like, there are other options. It's not a tier 0 format that's coming, but freaking the fire decks are still going to be the best by a decent margin, right? So does that mean you're forced into playing it? I guess that depends on the individual. You know, some people like me that are super competitive, I feel forced to probably play a fire deck in the upcoming months. So I guess this is just a matter of how seriously do you take the game. I think, once again, trying to find a little bit of a positive in this situation, in the upcoming months, there are going to be more budget options, but they are not going to be the best deck. If you're okay with not playing the best deck but saving 800 bucks in return, then you're probably going to be able to still play the game and still compete at a certain level, right? That is something that is possible. Still, I'm not going to defend the cost of what the Wanted engine is for, especially what is about to be a tier 1 deck. I'm not going to defend it. Only because I'm trying to look for some positive in the situation does not mean I'm defending it. This shit is outrageous. A tier 1 deck in this game should never cost this much. That being said, engines being expensive is something that I don't like, but I think it is better than staples being expensive. And this is unfortunately another thing that they have been doing a lot. They have made a huge step this past year towards the end of 2023, a huge step towards making this game more affordable, which was the Rarity Collection. The Rarity Collection is something we're going to circle back to a couple times during this discussion, because the Rarity Collection also had a rarity system that is far superior to anything we've ever seen, and that I think they should imply for other sets as well, and that's basically what we're gonna try to talk about possible solutions later. The Rarity Collection brought so many affordable staples to the game, which was incredible, right? Like cards like Pot of Prosperity, cards like Baron the Fleur, a lot of other stuff as well that was sitting around like 10, 20, 30 bucks, I don't know, Droplets, Triple Tactics Talons, you know, cards that maybe had even been reprinted before, but now are really like dirt cheap. Phenomenal set. But no matter how many steps in the right direction you take when it comes to making this game affordable, even one step in the wrong direction, it can ruin all the progress you've made, right? All the progress that you've made with the Rarity Collection basically gets completely negated by the fact that they made SP Little Knight a secret rare in Age of Overlord, and the fact that Triple Tactics Thrust was not in the Rarity Collection. Now, Triple Tactics Thrust is gonna be reprinted in Maze of Millennia. I mean, they're cheaper than before. That does not mean it's good and affordable. Like, it still is at pre-sale 44 bucks for the ultra rare, and the secret rare is currently sitting at the cheapest place at 57, right? For Triple Tactics Thrust. So it's not by any means affordable now. And SP Little Knight is a whole different beast, because SP Little Knight, honestly, if you thought Pot of Prosperity was a staple that was basically a barrier of entry for people to playing the game, there was a ton of decks that didn't need Prosperity. There is almost no deck in the game right now that does not need SP Little Knight. Almost none. SP Little Knight is mandatory for pretty much 90+% of the decks. And some even play 2. It's incredibly frustrating to me because it feels like we are in this vicious cycle of they print staples in a high rarity. Pot of Prosperity, Triple Tactics Talents, Triple Tactics Thrust, Forbidden Droplet, Evenly Matched. All those cards came into the game as a secret rare at first, even Ash. And then for the next couple weeks or months, those cards are huge barriers of entry for people when it comes to playing budget decks. And then when it finally is time for those cards to be reprinted, it's just that the next expensive staple is already around the corner. You can finally afford Prosperities 2 years after the people with a lot of money, and SP Little Knight is released almost at the same time. So now as a budget player, you finally have the consistency of Prosperity, but everyone else has Little Knight and you don't. So you're still kind of priced out of really competing at a high level, right? And so I think while reprints are great, reprints only cover up for the initial problem, right? The reason why we are so happy about reprints is only because those cards were hard to find prior, which shouldn't have been the case in the first place, okay? Yes, the Rarity collection was amazing, but it's only like overshadowing, I think, a bigger problem that we have. What's the most frustrating to me is staples, right? Because staples are what everyone needs, even if you're willing to play a less competitive deck because you can't afford the most expensive engines in the game. Not only do you have to play a worse engine than everyone else because you can't afford the Snake Eye cards, no, you also don't get to play the best staples. So your engine is worse than other people's, and your non-engine, your staples, are also worse than other people's. What's left? You know, you're left with an inferior deck in pretty much all regards. You can't even play a rogue deck that's carried a little bit by SP Little Knight or Prosperity's consistency or whatever when these cards are expensive, right? At the time where Evenly Matched was a secret, you couldn't even play a budget deck and try to blow the meta decks out with Evenly. You don't even get that. I find that kind of behavior the most frustrating about everything, is that they are not only making the engines expensive, they're also making all the non-engines super, super expensive. What I want to do with this discussion is I don't want to just complain. I want to really bring forward some points of how it could be better in a way that would still them make money, but make the people a lot happier when buying these cards, right? That's what I'm trying to get to. That should ultimately be the goal. I think we should agree on the fact that Konami needs to make money, but is this right now really the best way to make money? Because you're pricing a lot of people out of competing, and people that feel priced out of competing are people that you maybe lose in the long run. Maybe that's people that would be willing to spend some amount of money on Yu-Gi-Oh, right? But not that much, not the amount that you're asking from them. And so as a result, they're basically spending nothing at all, right? Because they're leaving the game, right? And so if you maybe find a balance to get those people to spend some amount of money, to get more people into the game, you know, you're making the game grow, and then maybe Konami makes a lot more money in total, right? And so that's the kind of solution that you should try to aim for, right? I think what it really comes down to, the biggest culprit for all of it, is the rarity system we have for regular sets in the TCG. The fact that every card, and I'm going to exclude quarter centuries or starlights because they don't do anything for the market really, not much at all. Every card is only in every pack in one rarity, that's it. And obviously they're gonna make the harder to find cards the highest rarity, because with the current rarity system they really have no choice but to do it in this way. Because if you only have every card in one rarity, what card are you going to make secret rare? Obviously it's going to be the good cards, because no one wants all the bad cards to be secret either, right? What kind of weird system would that be if they made all the bad cards secret rares that no one wants? Of course people want their highly playable cards to look shiny and fancy and all that, and it only makes sense for the high rare cards to be the better cards, right? But with the current rarity system, you basically have to pick your poison. Either you have a bad secret rare that's completely worthless because people don't want it, or you have a good card in secret rare, which then is only available in secret rare, and that's going to make it incredibly expensive, right? And so I think the underlying issue is very simply the rarity system, because no matter what, and I think it is worth at this point, we have to talk about comparing it to other card games and how it's done in the OCG. There are other ways of doing this. They are working in countless other card games, right? And that is quite simply print cards in multiple rarities. Easy as that. Maybe even have alternate artworks that are then the chase cards of the set, because really all that's needed for a set to sell well is that there is a certain demand for the cards in it. Some of the cards need to be rarer than others. If there's a demand for those kind of cards, people have to open the set up until that demand is met, basically, right? Basically, what they're doing right now is like, okay, everyone needs a Little Knight, so we're gonna make it secret rare, so they have to open a bunch of packs to get their Little Knights, right? And I know not everyone opens their own packs, but basically, if you use the vendors as a step in the middle, it still works like that, right? Like a certain amount of boosters need to be opened for the Little Knights to get in circulation, right? My argument is that having cards available in multiple rarities still leads to a lot of product being opened, right? Because even if something like Little Knight was available as a super rare, an ultra rare, a secret rare, or a quarter century on top of that, right? People would still be chasing that quarter century, right? People are doing that already. There's a demand for quarter century Little Knights, even though the secret rare exists. Not everyone is shooting for the cheapest version. People would still enjoy playing the high rarity versions. You are wrong. You have not made an argument at all. Like every other card game does it like this. Look at Pokemon. Pokemon is a card game that's living pretty much the same amount as Yu-Gi-Oh! And it has different rarities for the cards. It has different artworks for the chase cards. The chase cards are incredibly expensive and sought after, but there is cheap options for people to get if they wanna just save the money. One Piece does the same thing. Digimon does the same thing. But most importantly, I wanna drive the discussion a little bit away from the other card games, because other card games might be different than Yu-Gi-Oh! You know, maybe Pokemon is carried by the collectors. Maybe the economy is different for a different card game because the mentality of the community is different or something like that. Let's look at freaking Yu-Gi-Oh! Okay? In the OCG, which obviously Yu-Gi-Oh! In Japan has been around for even longer than it has been in the TCG, and it's doing very well. This is Age of Overlord, the most recent TCG set. As you'll notice, a lot of these cards are available in multiple rarities. The way they do this is there's commons, which are only available as commons. There is rares, which are only available as rares, and every other card has multiple rarities. If a card is a super rare, it also comes in secret rare, and it also comes in quarter century. If a card is ultra rare, it also comes in ultimate, secret, and quarter century. What this leads to is that people that care about blinging out their decks are still chasing for whatever rarity they prefer. You know, maybe they prefer the ultimate rare Diabellstar, maybe they prefer the quarter century Diabellstar, you know, whatever. But people that don't care just get the ultra rare, which is the cheapest version, because I don't know the exact spread, how many you get per box, but you definitely get a bunch of ultras per box, and so on and so forth, and like that leads to Diabellstar not being as expensive as it is over here, right? And cards in the OCG, they still are worth money, especially the high rarity cards, but the low rarity cards are typically relatively affordable. There's probably exceptions to this rule, right? There's probably cards that still go for a decent chunk of money even in the lowest rarity, and I'm sure that even in Japan, being able to always afford the newest top tier decks is a luxury that not everyone can afford. But still, overall, I don't know the exact price of a Diabellstar right now. I don't know the exact price of an SP Little Knight, which SP Little Knight is somewhere here. Where's SP? Let me look for SP. Here. SP Little Knight is a super rare in the OCG, secret rare, and quarter century. So super rare SP, $10 on eBay is what I'm seeing in chat right now. This is nothing but the rarity collection system applied to a normal main core booster set, except for the commons and rares. But every holo is just available in a variety of different rarities. It's working very well in the OCG, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I personally see zero reason why this wouldn't work in the TCG. I believe what this would lead to is, at the top end, people with money, people that are willing to invest money into Yu-Gi-Oh, people that are proud of owning expensive cards, people that are very elitist about, hey, we're playing this expensive hobby, they could still spend a lot of money on Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Because these chase cards, no matter what game you look at, whether it's OCG, whether it's Pokemon, whether it's One Piece, Digimon, whatever, alternate art, high rare versions of cards, always expensive. People want those cards. People feel good about having those cards. You know, people feel good about playing with the quarter century over the regular, with the ultimate rare over the common. People will look for those cards. The demand is still there. For people that are on a budget, there would be the option to afford a good deck still. Genuinely, I think this would make Yu-Gi-Oh more popular because people would see, hey, I can now afford a good deck for way less than before. Huge barrier of entry when it comes to currently not entering the game would be removed. everyone that already plays Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, obviously you wouldn't stop playing Yu-Gi-Oh! If cards became more affordable, so I think they would just have a larger player base, and I think they would make more money in return. My argument why I think it would work like this is my impression. I don't have the exact numbers, obviously, but I've talked to some people that are also vendors and stuff like that. I think the Rarity collection from all ends was probably the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Set of all time. Simple as that. From a consumer standpoint, the Rarity collection is insane. People love the Rarity collection. The only people that don't love the Rarity collection is like people that invested in Starlights of something that now got a cheaper high rarity print or whatever. Like, but I'm gonna be honest, the 99% of the community loves the Rarity collection, and a lot of people haven't even voiced their opinion on it yet because they haven't entered the game yet, but they might, because of the Rarity collection, get into the game, right? But I don't think it's only the players that love the Rarity collection. I think, and I would be super interested in the numbers here, but from every vendor that I've talked to, the Rarity collection has been doing great for them. They've been ordering more and more and more because the cards have been selling and they've been making profit on the boxes. Rarity collection has been, also from the vendor's perspective, probably been the best set of 2023. Age of Overlord was also really good for them, but I think the Rarity collection might honestly even still take the cake for 2023, and maybe even of all time, right? Which in return, if a set was good for the vendors, it was also good for Konami, because the better a set was for the vendors, the better it is for Konami. No, it wasn't. Age of Overlord was better. I don't think so. I don't think Age of Overlord was better, especially not in the long run. I think if you take two sets, if you take Age of Overlord the way it was in the TCG, and you take the Rarity collection, if those two sets, money-wise, make the same amount of money for the company and for the vendors, even if it's the same, I'm not even trying to argue which one is better or worse, right? If those two sets make the same amount of money, which one do you think is better for the health of the game in the long term? And I think the answer to that is so easy. If both of those sets perform the same, you should always make them like Rarity collection, because so many more people are going to play your game. Age of Overlord has not made a single person join the game. No one has looked at Age of Overlord and been like, oh my god, yeah, opening this feels so great. I want to start playing the game now. I want to build a deck seeing those prices from Age of Overlord. But people will join the game because Rarity collection. In the long run, Rarity was better, but Age of Overlord was better for vendors in the sense of making money. There's literally vendors in the chat right now saying Rarity was better for them. Even if it's remotely close to each other, I don't think they are comparable in terms of what they do for the game. Also, Age of Overlord, short term, probably also a good set for them. But as a matter of fact, you simply cannot make every set like this. Think about it from this simple perspective. Who the fuck is going to play this game if every set is Age of Overlord? It is not sustainable for the average Yu-Gi-Oh player for the sets to be like this. What is sustainable is sets like the Rarity collection. There's a couple things they simply need to stop doing as soon as possible. They need to stop doing the legendary collection, side sets, collector's rare sets. Those are straight up bad sets. The concept behind those sets is terrible. Also in, Maze of Millennia, I suppose they tried to make it better by putting thrust in it, but I'm gonna be honest, having sets where you already know the set is bad, so you need to make a certain card high rarity or put a certain reprint in it to make it even worth somewhat looking at, is not a good practice. It's just something they need to find a solution for. Those sets are just terrible. But the more overarching problem, or like not problem, but like solution rather, and I hope they realize this, right? Deep down, I hope they made infinite money on the Rarity collection and they just lean back for a moment and they're like, huh, so you can do it like this. So it does work if we print cards in multiple rarities. And that's what I want. I want them to adapt something similar to the Rarity collection rarity system to core sets. I do not think in the slightest that that is going to hurt the game at all. I think more people are going to play the game. I think people are still willing to spend money on the game. I think it would simply have the effect of drawing budget players into the game as well. It would overall lead to so much growth in the community. And I don't think they would be making a penny less, because that is important as well, right? That's the thing I want to point out the most. I don't expect them to do anything that would make them less money, that would earn them less money. They've been making a lot of money over the last couple years. I understand that it's hard to change a running system. I just think that the Rarity collection proves without a doubt that these sort of products can be insanely successful, and the practices that they are using right now to make money, making chase cards very hard to find and all that, I think they are outdated, and I think there's other ways that would make more people more happy, and they would still make more money. And that's my point. TCG does that often. I mean, there's been a time where the Mega Tin was a revolutionary thing, right? A lot of you probably won't remember this, but there was a time where it was not something that we were expecting towards the end of every year to get a reprint set of everything that's happened in the past year. It's like 10 years ago that they started doing that or something like that. That was not always common practice. That was a common practice that they have adapted at some point. They tried it once and it worked, and they've been doing it ever since. Gold Rare was the first thing. Yeah, Gold Series and stuff like that. They've been experimenting with that kind of stuff. The problem is what I said earlier is that reprints can never be the solution, right? Because people want the new cards. People want the cards when they come out for the first time. Reprints, if you really think about it, they really just amplify the problem for a lot of people, because as someone who has the cards, as someone who collects the cards, reprints don't feel great. If you paid $100 for your prosperities because you felt forced to as a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player, seeing them get reprinted and drop to $20 or something like that is not a good feeling. As someone who isn't able to afford prosperities in the first place, that's also not a good feeling. You're like waiting 2 years until you finally get your hands on prosperity. That doesn't feel great either. I mean, in the moment where they announce prosperity, of course you're happy. You're like, finally. But still, you shouldn't forget those 2 years you weren't able to afford it. And then, like I said, the next expensive staple is just around the corner. So yeah, now you can play with your prosperities for $5 or whatever, but you still don't have a Little Knight if you're on a budget. You're happy about the prosperity one moment, but then you turn around and Little Knight is like standing behind you with a freaking knife and stabs you in the back. Reprinting is not the solution. I'll give it to them. They have been applying a more aggressive reprint policy recently, right? I remember cards like Talents or something that have been reprinted into the ground, right? Like, and prosperity also got a bunch of reprints back to back to back. I feel like they have been getting a little bit more aggressive with their reprinting. Sure, yeah, they have. But reprints are only like a very band-aid fix for a problem that they created themselves, right? It all just goes back to, I think they need to change the rarity system. The freaking rarity collection, it has to get them thinking. I hope the rarity collection made them hella rich, and that they keep doing it like this. It's a shame because I don't have the exact numbers of how well the Yu-Gi-Oh! OCG is doing in Japan in terms of their sales, right? I cannot imagine it's doing badly, right? Because it's also survived for 25 years in Japan. So I feel like that's a very simple proof of concept that it works that way. They compete with much more other card games as well. I mean, that if anything is an argument for their system, right? In Japan, there's like so many other card games that people actively play, right? The fact that they still have so many people play Yu-Gi-Oh! Has to be a good argument for the way that they do it. There's just no way their system is bad when it's been working so well, competing with so many other card games. And that is something that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has to worry about in some shape or form, right? Because I feel like there is a little bit of an increase in actual competitors recently in Europe, right? I mean, I don't want to hate on any of those games like Digimon, One Piece, and those games. I mean, probably great games. I don't play them actively at the moment. I just want Yu-Gi-Oh! To be as healthy as possible, right? So I'm not rooting against those. You know, if anyone wants to play those games, go ahead. I've seen a lot of people enjoy those games. Sure, I'm not worried about Yu-Gi-Oh!'s future, but I care about Yu-Gi-Oh! The most, right? Obviously, I don't know how seriously they take these competitors, but I see a lot of people and their main argument is price very often. I mean, of course, there's a whole other discourse of like, is Yu-Gi-Oh! Too complicated? That kind of stuff, right? That's a discussion for another day, but I do think that the price of a deck is a valid reason for people to pick a game, right? I think a lot of people are just interested in card games, right? I mean, I personally am very connected to Yu-Gi-Oh, but I'm also very interested in card games in general, and I can only imagine that for a lot of people that play Yu-Gi-Oh, it's kind of the same way. They're Yu-Gi-Oh fans, but they're also maybe anime fans in general, so they wouldn't be completely opposed to playing Pokemon, One Piece, or Digimon, right? And then if you're a new player, you're like, okay, do I pick up the best deck in Yu-Gi-Oh for $1,000, or do I pick up the best deck in One Piece for whatever it is, like 200 or something like that? Just an example. I don't actually know the exact prices. I just remember when I played Digimon for a short period of time with my fiance, we didn't spend that much money on Digimon, and it was not that expensive to play Digimon at all. And I think that is a valid argument, right? And I think in the long term, Yu-Gi-Oh is going to be better off if it's more affordable. In the short term, Age of Overlord probably also makes them a ton of money. I don't want to guess whether it's better than the Rarity collection or worse, But what I do know is it makes them a lot of money in the short term, because everyone that's playing the game right now needs a Little Knight. And that means a lot of freaking Age of Overlord needs to be open. That makes them a ton of money. But what they don't factor into that equation, I don't think, is how many people maybe lose interest in the game because of how expensive the cards are, or how many people would be future customers but don't enter the game because they realize, hey, goddamn, this SP Little Knight is one piece of paper and it's 100 euros. Someone from outside the community who's maybe thinking about playing a card game is not going to have the understanding for that. We all know, talking to someone who is not very much into a card game yet, they never understand how we could justify spending so much money for cards, right? And so those are the kind of people that look at the price of SP Little Knight once, just once, and they never look back. Konami makes money out of the quantity they print. The vendors are the ones that make money based on the content. I mean, it is true, but basically it's kind of the same thing. The vendors and Konami are, you can kind of treat them as the same entity at this point, because the more a set sells, the more the vendors will buy from Konami. Vendors basically are just the outlet for where the stuff goes. A set is always going to be opened to the point where until the demand is met for it, right? They're just a middleman, yeah. So if a set is good, if a set is well designed, you know, people want it a lot, and vendors are going to open more because they realize, hey, those cards are selling really fast. There's a high demand for these cards because people like this set. And so they're going to order more and order more and order more, right? Prices are very much manipulated by online vendors, though. I honestly don't think vendors manipulate prices. I don't think vendors have the power to do that. I think the market just regulates itself very easily. Konami doesn't directly influence the prices or make the prices, but I think they know what their actions have, kind of consequences they have. Not always, like sometimes they try to give us cards in the lower rarity, like freaking Magnamute as a super rare. I don't think they intended it to be a freaking 20 euro card. That was just because the demand for it was insane. This circles back to a point I made earlier, which is that you can do as many good things as you want for the game. If you keep making bad decisions as well, those are going to overshadow everything, right? Because you can make super rare Magnamutes all you want. One SP Little Knight secret rare is still going to make the entire deck be way too expensive. Like one step in the wrong direction eliminates so many steps in the right direction. It doesn't matter how often they give us reprints of cool cards. If they keep printing new staples at secret rare, who cares that I can now get my prosperities for $2? I still need 2 Little Knights. Who's going to pay for that? On the one hand, I don't think it's something that they can do forever. At the same time, it's been working for 20 years, so I understand the argument of, hey, if the system is working, if it's making us money, then, you know, we should keep doing it. I think in reality, because it is a company, what would need to happen is they would need to see actual drops in numbers. They would have to feel it. They would have to feel a negative impact, which I don't know if they had that at some point. I don't know if that's happened. You know, what is the reason that they are doing the Rarity collection right now, but they haven't been doing it for the last 20 years? I'm sure they've had the idea before. Once again, trying to see the positive here. Maybe it is something that they've been noticing with One Piece coming up in the last couple years, Digimon coming up, and maybe it's something that they are like, okay, maybe we need to get rid of this stigma that Yu-Gi-Oh is the most expensive card game out there. Maybe we have to change something. Maybe it's also just a one-time thing because of 25th anniversary. Who knows? Only the future can tell. We don't know these things, unfortunately. We don't have that sort of communication with Konami. We can just go and ask like, hey, why aren't you doing sets like this more often? I wish we did, but we don't. Isn't Magic more expensive? I don't know. Commander is definitely more expensive. Well, yeah, I like, look, maybe it's not the most expensive card game, I don't know, but it is damn expensive, and there is definitely cheaper options out there, right? We don't have to argue about that. Wasn't the same conversation had with the adventure engine? I mean, that's the thing, right? We keep having this discussion, right? And that's the point, or that's the big question, is how often do we need to have this discussion until either they solve it somehow or people actually leave the game because maybe they were okay accepting it once or twice or 3 or 4 or 5 times, but eventually people might be like, oh, come on, man, it's too much. I've spent this much money on this game. I can't justify it anymore. I have no idea if that's something that even is going to happen, you know? Now people are leaving. I mean, there's always people that are leaving. There's always people that are joining. I don't know the exact numbers. That's very hard to judge. I don't know if there's more people leaving the game right now than there used to be. The only people that actually notice is Konami in their sale numbers. Cody Angelov has basically left. I mean, okay, that's one person, okay? I think the Yu-Gi-Oh community is going to survive if one person leaves, right? Everyone can probably name someone that has left the community, but I can also name people that have joined over the last couple months or whatever, right? That is not the point. Our locals have never been busier. I mean, yeah, tournaments have also been getting bigger and bigger and bigger as well. Another unfortunate truth that we might have to look at, I don't know if it is the truth, but one thing that we might have to face is that Yu-Gi-Oh is by large numbers also carried by casuals that don't really give a fuck if they can't afford a Little Knight. I don't know to which percentage the Yu-Gi-Oh revenue is made up by just casuals opening boxes. Don't even know how expensive Little Knight is, or if they won't get one, they will just not care because they're not going to tournaments anyways, or they just play with their friends or anything like that. Maybe to those kind of people, it doesn't matter if a card is short printed or whatever, right? So, you know, there's definitely people in the Yu-Gi-Oh community that are not fazed by SP Little Knight being $100 because they'll just be like, hey, I only play with my friends anyways. I don't need SP. We'll just all not have SP then, you know? And we just ignore the fact that it exists pretty much, right? So the only people that actually know if their practices are working is Konami. Simple as that. Because they have the numbers. They can see, okay, this set sold that much, this set sold that much, and those could be the reasons, right? I think that's the reason why Thrust was not in the Rarity collection, but rather was thrown into Maze of Millennia. Because they saw how those kind of sets performed in recent years, and I'm sure it wasn't great. They were like, we're gonna save Thrust for that set. We need to do something about these side sets, otherwise they're gonna be garbage. Rarity Collection was one of the OCG version. It was just minus Maxi. Well, I mean, I'm sure they could have just thrown Thrust in there if they wanted to, but I mean, they didn't want to. That's the point. But I feel like it's often just a thing of if something works well, they will just do it again because there's no reason not to, right? Like, for example, at some point, they started doing megatins with reprints and those did super well, so they kept doing it. Now, some of them have been better than others, but they've been doing it every year since the first one, right? And I hope the same thing is going to happen with Rarity Collection, and I hope that even they implement a different Rarity system for the core sets because of it. That was plenty of enough discussion about card prices. I think I've gotten my points across and we can move on.